Hey everyone, I've got a quick fix for you today, and that is some different options for securing your stabilizer to your exterior fabric when using fusible stabilizers. When you use a fusible stabilizer such as fusible fleece or foam, often after you turn your bag, particularly if you have used a lighter material, you will have little wrinkles on the outside that are pretty much impossible to press out. So I'm going to show you a couple of alternative ways to attach your stabilizer so that you can avoid the wrinkles on your finished bag. So let's get going. The first method that I'm going to show you is my preferred method. For this method, we are going to be fusing our stabilizer to a second piece of interfacing. I like to use a lightweight interfacing. I use P44F. The reason that I choose to use this type of interfacing, which is a non-woven interfacing and it's very thin, is because it doesn't add to bulk in the seam allowance. I also have my stabilizer piece that has been cut to fit on my exterior panel with a good gap in the seam allowance. The first thing that we need to do is fuse our stabilizer piece to our second piece of interfacing. I have applied my initial interfacing to my exterior panel. It's up to you if you choose to interface this panel as well. It depends on the material you are using. My panel is quilting cotton, so I have interfaced that with my usual lightweight woven interfacing. You're going to place your stabilizer so that it is glue sides down on the glue side of your second piece of interfacing. And you want to center that up. And what we're going to do is fuse the stabilizer to this interfacing. So we have the glue here at the outside, and this is the glue side of my stabilizers. I generally use my iron when I am doing this as opposed to using my heat press. And I do use steam so that I get good adherence of the fleece. You can set your iron down to have more of a pressing motion. Because this is fairly thin interfacing and the glue melts quickly, I tend to just do a light iron, but pressing by setting your iron down on the surface is the way that it is generally recommended to apply interfacing. So I'm going to fuse those two together, making sure that I'm just fusing where my fleece is, not touching the glue side of my interfacing with my iron. Using a Teflon sheet is useful just in case you miss, so that you don't accidentally glue that to your ironing surface. Once that fleece is adhered to your interfacing, you can place that combination piece right sides together with your exterior. And what we're now going to do is press around the edge of the fleece, making sure that we're tucking the edge up to the side of the stabilizer and go all the way around, securing this interfacing just within the seam allowance. And when that is fused on, you will still have a nice smooth surface on your exterior panel because the glue is only adhered within the seam allowance and you have no adherence in the center, so you won't get those wrinkles. So just tucking my iron up against the edge of that stabilizer. My priority is making sure that it is tucked nicely around the edge. I'm not too worried about whether my interfacing is reaching the edge of my material. I'm going to trim off any excess, and I already have my interfacing applied to the main panel, so it doesn't matter if there's a little gap at the edge of the seam allowance. If you have these corners like this, it does get a little tricky to press it right in tight there, but just do your best. You can press from the other side too, since there is no glue in that middle section. The glue is right sides together with this extra piece of interfacing. So I have my stabilizer centered on my exterior panel. I'm going to trim off any excess. I generally cut my second piece of interfacing just roughly to size. If you've cut it exactly to size, then there probably won't be any excess there. And now that piece is ready to be sewn up. And the interfacing is well secured to my exterior, but I'm not going to get wrinkling from the glue on the right side of my finished bag. The next method I'm going to show you tends to work better if you are using a non-fusible stabilizer for your bag. I am still using the same fusible fleece, so I'm going to demonstrate this way with a caveat that it is better if you don't have glue on one side, as we won't be fully fusing the interfacing to our stabilizer. Because I have glue on one side of this, I like to place it so that the glue side is right sides up on the back so that this doesn't have glue, so that if I need to press my exterior, I'm not going to melt that glue onto my outside panel. So the same way as we did for the first method, I have my stabilizer cut to the correct size that leaves the gap around the outside edge. But rather than fuse an entire piece of interfacing over the top here, I have these small strips that I'm just going to fuse around the edge. Again, my preference is to use the lighter weight interfacing, but you can use your usual interfacing if that is what you have access to. So what I'm going to do is cut small strips, and I'm just going to place them around the edges, overlapping the edge of my stabilizer piece and going into the seam allowance. And I'm just going to fuse those little strips in place. I don't worry about this inside boxed corner. I just do the long edges and these short edges, and I tend to do one at a time so that I don't get a lot of shifting. It does get a little bit tricky to avoid the glue here, so having a Teflon sheet to protect your iron can be useful. I find it's easier to first press my interfacing to the seam allowance and then fuse it to my stabilizer. I'm just staying on the interfacing because there's glue here that I don't want to iron on. Using a little bit of steam and going around the same way as we did when we had the whole piece, but it's just in that outside edge. The benefit of this is that it uses up less of your interfacing. The disadvantage is that I have the glue side exposed, but if you are using a non-fusible stabilizer, you won't have that problem. So that is secured around the outside edges. The center is not fused to anything, so when you are continuing to construct your bag, if you are using fusible stabilizer and you have the glue side exposed and then you go to press your bag, this area may melt. It really depends on how long you're holding your heat onto your exterior. The third option that I don't use as often would be to cut your stabilizer piece the size of your exterior rather than having it smaller, and then place it on your exterior and baste around the outside in the seam allowance. The problem with this method is that you still have the bulk. You can't trim that excess out of your seam allowance when you've basted it. So alternatively, you could cut your stabilizer to be the correct size in 2 of the dimensions and just baste it in the other 2 dimensions. So for this piece, I've cut it to the size of the stabilizer piece at the sides, but the top and the bottom are taller so that I can baste it within the seam allowance at the top and at the bottom. And you can choose if you want to do that at the sides or at the bottom. And then I will just zigzag across the top and the bottom to keep that stabilizer positioned on my exterior without needing to fuse it. If you're using fusible stabilizer but not actually fusing it, just consider whether you'll need to press your material from the outside. If you place it glue sides together with your exterior, when you press it, there will be some adherence there. So you can place it with the glue side facing away from your exterior. And just note, if you are pressing it from the outside, that this glue may melt a little depending on the heat and how long you're applying that for. So using a long and wide zigzag stitch, and I'm just going to baste within the seam allowance at the top and at the bottom. Make sure that it is smooth so that you don't have bunching of your exterior. You want to make sure that those stitches are going to be hidden within whatever the seam allowance is on your finished pattern. So that is secure, but it is not fused. So I won't get any of the problems with wrinkling on my exterior when fusing my stabilizer. So those are some different options for securing your stabilizer to your exterior fabric that reduce the risk of wrinkles on the outside of your material. I find these methods are particularly useful if you are using materials such as water-resistant Oxford or bonded polyester, where it's generally not advised to interface them. If you use these methods to apply your interfacing, you are unlikely to get wrinkles on your finished project, and that can give you many more options for using those different materials. Wrinkles are also less likely to show up on prints as opposed to solid colors. There are also some vinyls that tend to be more prone to wrinkling or appearing to have wrinkles when you fuse stabilizer to them, so these are good options for those as well. I'm just going to take the opportunity to mention that there is an updated stabilizer piece for the Pythagorean pouch. The original stabilizer piece did not have as much of a gap around the outside when placed on your exterior fabric compared to the way that I like to draft my patterns now. So I have the updated stabilizer piece that has more clearance around the outside. That is particularly useful if you are using foam or if you are using these methods for fusing your stabilizer to your exterior fabric. The link to the updated stabilizer piece is with the Pythagorean pouch pattern files on my Google Drive. So you can access those and download those directly for free. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.